Welcome back, friends and scoundrels. Roll to live. Today we're going to talk about Dungeons and Dragons 5e a little bit, and today we're talking about multiclassing and other ways to achieve versatility with your player or with your character. So, a little bit of my background. Most of my Dungeons and Dragons playing experience came through the video game Neverwinter Nights, and I multiclassed a lot in that game because I felt you kind of had to build a party. That's at least my gameplay style, because you're a lone adventurer rather than having a party like you normally do in a tabletop setting, or I think you can even do it in the MMOs. Well, I know you can in the MMOs. That's kind of the purpose. But it took I had a couple different combinations. I always did sorcerer because I always wanted the familiar. I did rogue for a long time because I liked picking locks and disarming traps and stuff. But then I switched over to a ranger and started picking up animal companions, and I think I even used animal empathy to pick up an additional animal companion a lot of times. So for me, it seemed really useful to multi-class in that game because it didn't, stat-wise and mechanics-wise, it didn't seem to hinder my abilities as much. But for me, at least in 5e, which is all I've played outside of that, again, multi-classing doesn't seem that beneficial. It seems to actually kind of hinder your ability as a player unless you have a pretty decent sized party or something. I don't know. You got started in 3.5, right?
Yeah.
Did you have any experience watching anybody else or multi-classing yourself?
No, I played just straight rogue just all the time.
And
It's literally all I did.
maybe we could have probably looked at the rules for that before. I didn't think about that before we started recording. But
I did. But I was too lazy to get up and go get those rules.
But, so I don't know how multi-classing worked. I would assume it was probably pretty similar to what the mechanical rules are in 5e, where you only gain in that class when you take it as a level. And why I don't think it's that beneficial is because, like I said, it hinders you because you actually get set behind. Your overall level is the same, but your class level is way behind.
Yeah, when leveling in the class I've chosen, I just can't wait to get the next awesome thing. And if I multi-class, it's going to take longer to get, like my cleric, like the next step in channel divinity.
Yeah.
It's going to take longer to get there.
Well, and now you're waiting for two awesome things, and that's one of the things, if I were to change it for multi-classing specifically, would be that there are certain elements that always increase no matter what. Like whatever your overall level, kind of like the spell slots, how they address that in the book.
Yeah.
Those always still advance no matter how many classes you've multi-classed into. But, like, there's certain things that advance as you gain levels, and I know it should be, or it says in that class level, but I think just some of those things, if you give them, like, I don't think sneak attack would be bad, because if you only get it when you reach that rogue level, then you're not gaining that extra damage like you should.
Yeah.
And you're still using it, so realistic, to keep it or give it a real world context, if you're constantly using something, you should still be able to learn how to deal more damage. Is my thought on it. I try to think of like how would this work in the real world.
Well, yeah, I agree. Especially like with sneak attack as the example. If you're using sneak attack, continually, but you're not continuing levels in rogue, the sneak attack is still being used. So in a real world situation, you would still be improving on your sneak attack.
Yeah. But that's just one of the changes I would make, is certain things would still have the ability to grow and advance. So that way it can be more beneficial without seeming or overpowering. Or maybe because I could see it getting overpowered really quickly too. Because then you could take multiple classes and gain those abilities. But at the same time, like, there's a lot of those things you only gain at certain levels in that class. Like, I'm not saying you should be able to get that ability earlier or anything. It'd still come naturally like it's supposed to.
That's not exactly what you wanted to talk about. You wanted to talk about using feats instead of multiclassing.
Because I want to talk about multiclassing, and I wanted to talk about an alternative to multiclassing that's more beneficial. And why I think it's more beneficial, which brings us, I guess, into using feats instead. And obviously we'll probably talk about some homebrew or some modifications that can be made, but there's a lot of feats that are kind of class specific or can be used to gain abilities from other classes without multiclassing. Because a lot of times, like, if you have a party that's lacking a rogue, people will feel forced to take the
criminal background.
So
like I did in ours. I took criminal background because we don't have a rogue.
So that way they can gain that ability, which is kind of a meta thing to do. And as a bit of a power player, I call it power player, where you max out your character to be the most effective. Or not even max out, but like give attributes to be the most effective. You know, choose. I tend to go for the more combat-oriented spells because they're the most useful to me.
I don't. I like to try and use the non-combat spells as much and as creatively as possible.
But it's along that same line of doing things specifically to gain benefits for the character, as opposed to making a character and just dealing with what you can in the game, like would happen in the real world. That isn't to say that, like, to go into my point about the using feats instead, you can pick up some thieves' tools. You're just not going to have proficiency in them, so it's not going to give you the benefit. But at 4th level, you've been using this tool for a while, so as a story element, and again, to add that aspect of realism, you've been using this so you would gain knowledge in doing it, and the skilled feat gives you a combination of gaining proficiency in 3 skills or tools of your choice. And thieves' tools are a tool, so you could pick that up in a couple skills or whatever. Maybe you've been playing a game and now you know how to, and you have proficiency in a game or whatever. I forget if that's actually a thing or not, but game set or whatever. So that's another way that you could kind of sort of multi-class without having to take away from what you are trying to achieve in the game. What's another one that we looked at? The Dungeon Delver is another good way to pick up some of those rogue-like capabilities.
Yeah.
Because it gives you the ability to find secret doors and traps a little bit easier. An increase in intelligence, I think, also comes along with it. I forget offhand.
Oh, if only we had the book.
I know, God.
That's what you get for trying to remember wisdom. Perception and investigation.
Okay, so it's not on the ability, but specific skills.
Yeah.
Which is something, you know, if you're looking at building your character and you're thinking that's something you might do down the road, because those are things you should be thinking about when you're designing your character anyways. Most people do. I'm not saying you should, but
what are my character's goals in life?
Yeah, what's your plan with this character? Where are they going? How are they going to develop as an adventurer? Or how you think they could develop as an adventurer, because things change along the way. It happens. Like, now I talked about not multi-classing, but I was going to completely away from the one, so it wasn't going to be as bad as normal. but I was playing a ranger in our Tomb of Annihilation, and around 4th level, I started playing with the idea of multiclassing with him, and I was going to take a feat as a story element to gain. I think I was going to do cleric, wasn't I? Or was I going to do paladin? Either way, I was going to take. I think it was cleric.
I think cleric.
But I was going to take. What is that one called? Where you gain the spells? Arcane.
Magic Initiate.
Yeah, Magic Initiate to start gaining those abilities, to say, I'm being tested by my god right now, and because it was a very kind of religious character, paid attention to his deities, and he was going to be bestowed these gifts, and then use that as a vehicle to move into being a cleric, and then he was just going to take that path. So the ranger was going to become a very secondary thing, because it's kind of what he always been in his life, but now he has a purpose and he's going to move forward with that. So that's using the feat again as an example, and that unfortunately he died there too. But like as soon as I made that decision, he got killed off. This is the D&D gods telling me that I shouldn't multi-class. But it's kind of an example of using a feat to gain abilities for something that you normally wouldn't.
I think healer is another good one. The healer feat is a way to get the ability to heal well without having to take a healer class. Although they've kind of added more with the Xanathars, I think. More things that have a healer ability to it, so there's a wider range of healing.
They gave healing ability to the sorcerer. There's a healer one there, and they added it for another class that normally wouldn't, that should have it, that doesn't.
Yes, but you do have to take those subclasses though.
Yeah.
But the healer feat is a good way to get the ability to heal without having to take a specific healer path.
Yeah, because it's another one of those things where I think maybe people just forget about feats until the feat comes up, and they're like, oh yeah, I get to do this really cool thing now. So if you think about that ahead of time, you can maybe go down the direction that you want to as a player with your character, instead of feeling cornered into playing something that you normally wouldn't feel comfortable because you need to have that thing.
Yeah.
And using Magic Initiate also is another way to kind of gain that healing capability too, because you have a couple cantrips that kind of give you some healing capability, don't you?
There's the
very minor, but
cleric Spare the Dying, which just stops your death saves, which in a pinch is something.
Yeah, but you've even got Cure Minor Wounds as a first level spell, isn't it?
Cure Wounds, yeah.
So you've got Cure Wounds also, so I know it's not drastic, but it's better than nothing. Or it's a way to at least pick up a secondary healer too, without having to do anything drastic. Even though they can only do it once. Yeah. But still, I mean, it could be enough to fix the healers, that way everybody else can go on.
It's the standby healer save.
Yeah.
I don't know, because I always took Magic Initiative to just be cantrip heavy, so I would be able to take all the silly non-combative cantrips that I like to use in the weird ways that I like to use them.
Yeah, I usually take Tough, because it gives you extra hit points, and I always manage to roll really low.
But then in all the games we've played that we level up, I have never taken skill points. I always take the feat. I've always advanced my character through just feats. Yeah.
It depends on what's going on. Like, if I've got a couple that are really low that or one or two that are really low that, alright, I need something here again, because I try to optimize my character for the game as much as possible. I'll take a skill boost, or if, as a spellcaster, I want to get to that next level, I'll take a skill boost if it'll get me there. Otherwise, yeah, it's usually just taking feats.
That's the only place I'm a power player is with my spellcasting ability. If, like, everything I roll is low, I will put the skill into the spellcast ability to get that up, but otherwise, I'm taking feats. Yeah. If I feel that it's high enough.
Oh, I forgot about that. What brought up this topic was I was scrolling through iFunny and looking at Dungeons and Dragons hashtags, and somebody asked the question. They're playing a rogue, but they want to get a little bit more fightery, or be able to be more frontline. I don't know if I didn't ask. I didn't invoke a conversation with this person, but it did give me reason to think about it.
There are several feats that'll make you more fightery.
But I don't like I was saying. I don't know if he was just trying to help pick up slack because they only had one frontliner, or if he just wanted to be a little bit more involved. And I wanted to suggest, just stick with the rogue. You're gonna start picking up a lot more damage capability with your sneak attack here soon. Make sure you're flanking and doing all these things to give yourself those advantages. Like, just play the rogue. Rogues can be very beneficial without being up in the face and doing a lot of damage.
They can, and an example of that is Critical Role. Liam Vaxel Dan. He was a very effective rogue, and he played it well with daggers, which are low hit weapons. But he was still effective with
damage,
it. Low damage, yes. That's what I meant. Weapons, but when you play it right, they can still do with the sneak attack damage, and of course there are advanced daggers that you eventually get, but it's just if the DM gives them to you.
Yeah, because if you're effective as a rogue, too, you can hide in one spot, make your attack, and then move away from that spot and go try to find another spot to hide or something. A little bit of ignorance on the rules with that, because I don't know, but there are feats that can grant you extra on that and everything. But I started looking through the feats because that's kind of what I started thinking about. Was like, there's feats that are kind of geared specifically towards a class, but you don't have to be part of that class to gain the benefits of it. And I think that's kind of part of the point. So I started looking at it, and I forget what it's called.
Tavern Brawler?
Yeah, Tavern Brawler, kinda. Not really, because it gives you more capability with improvised weapons, right? Yeah. It was Martial Adept. Where you gain 2 maneuvers from the Battlemaster archetype in the fighter class, which is pretty cool. And you get the superiority die, so that way you can use those. So there is some restriction, which isn't a bad thing. There should be with that, because you're not a fighter, and you don't gain any extra superiority die as you go along. But you do get it back after a short or long rest. But that's one way you can kind of gain a little bit more extra advantage.
Because as a druid, I took the Polearm Master feat because it allows you to use the other end of your quarterstaff, so it makes you hit a little harder to make it more fightery, so I wasn't so magic dependent. And couple that with Chalet, get some good hits in. Not that I ever took Chalet.
Yeah, because a lot of times as a caster, you end up being really squishy and not very strong or dexterous, so being up front fighting is not really much of an option.
Yeah. But
occasionally you do get that creature that comes over to you and you have to defend yourself more directly.
Yes. Like my poor cleric. She's so screwed. She misses everything.
Just odd, because they're supposed to be good at that. So yeah, I think, we did go through the feats and zenithars, the racial feats. But I don't think they're beneficial in the same way because they grant very specific things to a race. And one that kind of bothers me a little bit anyways, because as something that's racial, I'm okay with it being when you get to this level, you gain this ability.
Oh yeah, I think the things that are racial feats should definitely be things that advance with the race, like classes advance as you level. The races should have that.
They should.
And that's what these feats should be.
Because a feat to me is something that you're capable of learning either through direct learning, like being another class and working more along with the rogue and picking up the lock picking abilities or whatever, or just trying to do something you or at some point are going to get better at it.
Yes.
And that's what a feat should be to me.
It's more of a learned skill, unlike with like
a racial feat. It's something, or a racial ability. It's something that should be inherent to what you are, that might not manifest itself immediately, but
yeah, like the Dragonborn fierceness. Is that what it was?
Fright, I think, something like that.
Whatever it is. It's not something you should have to learn. You just, as you become more dragonbornier, you get scarier.
Kinda, yeah. Dragon fear. I've got some tribbles with that too, but
yeah, I've got some problems with that one too. But
But that's not what we're talking about.
With the racial feats anyway, I wouldn't take them in lieu of some of the other feats because the other feats are just so much better.
Yeah, and in a lot of cases, you're not gaining a lot of extra ability. I mean, the elf's kind of a little bit, if you're a specific kind of Ralph. Like the drow, I think of all the elves, the drow has the most beneficial one because you gain detect magic and you can cast it at will.
Yes.
And that is just...
that's the only reason I would take that one, but I'd have to be a drow first. It's another one of those things that you're picking your race based on the feats and skills and stuff you get from it to optimize.
Yeah. Yeah, it's one of those things you can kind of homebrew a little bit. Maybe, you have access to it just being an elf. Because as an optimizing style player, I avoid doing like drow or anything like that because, yeah, you get some incredible dark vision capabilities, but you have disadvantage anytime you're in the sun, and if you're with a normal adventuring party, you're always at disadvantage, or almost always at disadvantage.
That's something I would take though because I don't mind.
Yeah. It's another thing for me to think about, and I like
the fun role playing options.
It does present that.
I prefer it to the optimization that you put into your characters.
Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's another thing I have to think about, so it kind of pulls me out of the role playing a little bit. Because if I forget, then somebody else is like, "No, you have disadvantage." I'm like shocked out of whatever it is that I'm doing. I'm like, God, now I got to rethink what I was doing. So, yeah, there's not a whole lot to say here. I didn't think there would be with the racial feats, because even when we got this and looked through it, I wasn't overly impressed with the idea.
And again, we were talking about using feats as a way to multi-class, and the racial feats, you can't do that unless you are that race, and then it's not giving you multi-class-like options anyway.
Yeah, so really kind of irrelevant. We just had to address it because they're called feats. So now I suppose it's time to talk about some methods of modifying or homebrewy options. So me personally, thinking about this, if I were to redesign the feat system, because I think it could use a little bit of an overhaul, I'd have different tiers of feats. So it'd probably just be two, like a minor feat option and a major feat option. And with the minor feats, I would, as a game designer, would allow 2 in place of the 1 feat, because they're going to be a lot less, but they give you a little bit more tapping into that class option. And I'd
like the feats now, they have like, most of them have like 3 bullet points that they add to, and the minor ones would have to have a single bullet point.
and they give you like extra. So like your major ones would be kind of like the feats that are in here, and I'd make them more, especially the minor ones, more class oriented than the major ones. Because like I said, a lot of these, they give you bonuses to abilities or to multiple skills or whatever, whereas a minor one would be a proficiency in a specific weapon class, or going into the class themselves, pulling just one element of a class feature or subclass feature, like sneak attack, uncanny dodge, 2-weapon fighting. So that way you can gain that as a rogue without having to go so far in fighting. It's not. I don't think it's quite the same. Maybe I'm thinking wrong, but I mean it would be to just have that ability to handle 2 weapons. It wouldn't have all this extra stuff.
Yeah, there's the dual wielder.
Because I thought 2-weapon was part of fighting or ranger or something. I don't remember. It's been a while since I played in your campaign. But things like that that are specific to a class that can open that up to you a little bit more. Because a lot of times people will take the class just to get that multi-class, to get 1 or 2 features, and if you can just get that feature without all the added stuff, I think
all the extra fluff.
Yeah, I think it would be a lot more beneficial to players and
losing
characters.
Levels in your main class.
Yeah.
Because while you're not losing, they're not being taken away, but you're also not advancing. So you are technically still losing levels.
Yeah.
Especially if the rest of your party is advancing in their levels. Even though you're at the same, if you happen to be at the same experience point tier, but you're like a 3 and a 2 and they're 5, it's going to make them seem a little more...
Well, you're not hitting as hard, you're not keeping up with ability capabilities, and you might have a more varied amount of skills, but those skills that you do have, you're not as skilled in, as skilled as you can be. So it kind of leaves you a little bit behind in those regards. And you have the hit die thing, which honestly I think would be a little bit better prescribed to a race than a class.
Yeah.
Because it doesn't make as much sense to me for it to be class related, because your constitution is more tied to your racial ability than it is your class ability. And your hit die is a reflection of your constitution, not...
I don't know. I took the constitution advancing one for optimization, which I normally don't do, but to make it so my concentration spells.
Yeah. Well, I mean, and it kind of contradicts what we said earlier about a feat being something learned, but it's a passive learning, because you're adventuring, you're doing things, you're getting hit, your body's going to become more resilient because of that. You are going to have a little bit more capability in that regard. So while you yourself might not be learning a skill, your body is learning to take care of itself better. Especially when you throw in the factors of you have magic going into you and all these other things. It still kind of makes sense to have tough as a feat. But I mean, we all think of Dragonborn and half-orcs and dwarves. I mean, dwarves have the dwarven resilience, which gives them a little bit more to their hit points through their constitution. I mean, those ability scores are a reflection of you not necessarily your skill. They're an inherent attribute to who you are.
Yeah.
And I mean, while you can increase your strength and increase your intelligence and your wisdom and all these things in the real world, even, and in the game, through practice and doing things, there's certain parts of it that are just naturally there. Like athletic people, people who are more techie, things like that. So that's why I think I forgot what we were originally talking about, but oh, your constitution stuff. That
Yeah.
those should be more attuned to, or the hit dice. That should be more attuned to your race than your class, because your job doesn't give you healing abilities your body does.
Yeah.
That's my point. Long roundabout way of getting there, but I'm gonna blame that partially on you. You brought up other points. So yeah, if I was a game designer, that's kind of how I would do it. You can always use that as a homebrew option instead of designing a game around it. That's like, we kind of toyed with the idea of maybe trying to develop a game system or modify something a little bit
Oh, so much work.
in our way, in a different way. And maybe when we do have more time, we'll try to do that. But something that we thought about doing was with your skills. Every time you use a skill and you're successful, you get a point for it. It's kind of like a leveling up system with it, like experience. And when you hit so many of these experience points with it, you gain an actual skill point for it. So like how it increases your proficiency with it, instead of just, all right, you're proficient with this skill and blah blah blah. It gives you the ability to learn different things.
Yeah.
Which, again, makes it a little bit more realistic, because as an individual, I can go learn all these things and become relatively proficient in them without hindering those other abilities. That's something that we played around with. It can be simple but complicated at the same time, because it's another thing you have to track and be mindful of.
Love tracking all of the things.
But I don't think it's necessarily that big of a deal, especially if you're using like a dry erase board or something. And you don't want to make that too easy either. I think we decided on 10 points to get an actual skill point.
I don't know. It's
I don't know.
mostly irrelevant to the current topic.
Well, not really, because we're talking about homebrewing options, and
Yeah, but that's just way out there off of home brewing what's already here.
yeah, kinda,
Yep, very.
kinda,
Very.
kinda,
Very.
not much. But that's up to you as the DM if you want to use that, and how many points you think a person could use. Do you have anything?
Nope.
No. So I suppose we've exhausted this topic for the day. If we think of anything else, maybe we'll throw it in a little mini podcast or something. But thanks for watching. Like, comment, subscribe. Share this around. Turn on the notifications. Check out our Facebook. Anything else?
I have no idea. I just want to turn the fan back on. It's hot.
And until next time.
Live to roll.
Live to roll.